Hey, what's up, guys? If you didn't see, the FDA did a very interesting, sort of like virtual town hall, I think is what they called it. Basically, a public Zoom meeting on stem cells. And it was a very interesting discussion. The whole thing is it's pretty lengthy. It's 3.5 hours long, but honestly, the last 3 hours and 20 minutes or so are some private companies presenting their research, which is very interesting. But also, the most interesting part was the very beginning, from minutes about 4 minutes up to about 10 minutes or so. They talked about how the stem cell laws may change. They're hinting at, they're reevaluating how the stem cell laws work. So who is this guy? This is Dr. Peter Marks, who is the head of CBER, which is the biological side of the biologics side of the FDA. So he essentially regulates stem cells. He's like the head guy for stem cell regulation. And Dr. Peter Marks said some very interesting things in here, and I'll play the video too so you can hear it straight from him. But yeah, I mean, honestly, after seeing this, my respect for him, I already had respect for him, but more respect. It's grown now. He does kind of disclose, like, hey, these stem cell laws were made like in the 90s, and it's 2025 now. Stuff has just changed so much. The technology has advanced so much. Maybe we do need to reevaluate how these things come to market and how we classify these things. And I've got an article coming out where I'll break down all the stem cell laws, because it's very fascinating. It's a law that's done sort of on an, you could think of it as an honor system in a way. It's you essentially self determine where your product fits legally and act accordingly to where you think your product fits. Of course, the FDA does inspections of your lab and will watch your website and make sure you're not making claims and such. But companies still do make claims, and companies are not putting themselves in the correct category and going to market and making tons of cash all the time because of this sort of self-determined policy. And not until you become a big enough a target for the FDA to do something, whether that's send you a warning letter or take you to court or something, these companies just get away with it for as long as you want, and it's all over the country. I've heard estimates that there are thousands of like stem cell related clinics selling stem cells and exosomes and such around the country. And yeah, I mean, you've heard the term Wild West so many times, and it's a symptom of what Dr. Peter Marks is going to discuss here, and that is technology has changed again. It's changed a lot in the last 25 years, in the last generation, while the laws just quite haven't. So let's hear what Dr. Peter had to say.
So good morning and welcome. Thank you for attending today's workshop, which is being held to look at the generation of scientific evidence necessary to facilitate the development of cell therapies and tissue-based products. These entities comprise a remarkably diverse array of medical products that range from simple skin grafts to artificial organs. And the remarkable breadth of this class of medical products makes it both challenging and yet intellectually quite stimulating to regulate. Work on the current regulatory framework began more than 3 decades ago and was based on our scientific understanding at that time of cell therapies and tissue-based products. It resulted in a two-tiered system of products, all products being regulated to prevent infectious or communicable disease transmission.
So just to kind of clarify what he means by resulted in a two-tiered system, what he means is if you have an orthobiologic, you can either be put into what's called a 361 or a 351. A 361 is much lower barrier to entry. You can go to market with a lot less capital, a lot less testing, and all that. But if you're put into a 351, you're regulated like a drug, and that requires like full clinical trials and IND, BLA, all these like certifications and tests, and at the end of the day, costs a lot more money to get that done. So every company wants to be that 361, that lower barrier to entry. Nobody wants to be a 351 because that's much more difficult. But are two broad categories. Is that the right way to go about it? Either you are or you aren't a drug. We don't know.
But those meeting certain criteria, those at Part 1271 of Title 21 of the Code of Federal Regulations, were regulated in a way that approval was not required, whereas all other products required regulatory submission and approval. And although that framework was perhaps appropriate for the state of the science in the mid 1990s, the science has so greatly evolved along with the products that are being brought forward that we now have a much more complex set of products that are very complex across the whole spectrum of manufacturing and clinical data requirements. Some, though, requiring very little data, perhaps in those areas, some perhaps requiring a lot more for us to understand that they are safe and effective for their intended uses. So this makes it us come to a place where we may need to consider revisiting the existing regulatory framework and to consider alternative frameworks. And we're pretty early along in the process. So today's workshop will hopefully help us to consider more of the science and to help us move further along on the journey towards optimally bringing scientific advances to patients through cell and tissue-based therapies. So with that said, I want to thank you for joining us and turn this over to Dr. Verdun, who's the director of our Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies.
Yeah, so that's Dr. Peter Mark's pretty much entire speech there, and the rest of the talk is it gets very techy, but it's awesome. If you're into stem cells and trying to learn about stem cells, try to wrap your head around what is happening. This is the way you do it: is you sit there and you present all the key findings and where you're at with your therapy and charts and graphs and studies and objective data and what went right, what went wrong. And all these companies did that. There's like 4 presentations from these private companies, and they're really good as well. But they're again pretty techy. But anyways, that's the that's the news right now, and we'll see where it goes. Again, respect for Dr. Peter Marks. I already had it, but I have more now. And it sounds like they at least they recognize that there's a problem happening here. Hence why everybody's going to Mexico and going to Colombia or whatever. It's like, hey, there is something there potentially, but you can't get it here. And people are suffering enough they'll roll the dice and get stem cells created from a Mexican lab into their spine. Um, and it looks like the FDA is at least moving the needle, at least recognizing that this is a problem. So I'll break that down and kind of relate that to what the current laws are, because there's just a lot of confusion on are stem cells legal. A lot of companies will say they are when they probably aren't, and why that is and why that's even a problem. And yeah, so look forward to that article. Thanks for watching.